At 16:20 on the 31st of May 1916, Derfflinger's crew was able to make out the silhouettes of British battlecruisers on the horizon, and these were the 1st and 2nd battlecruiser squadrons of the Grand Fleet under the command of Vice Admiral Sir David Beatty. At 16:48, the range had closed enough to where Derfflinger could open fire, and it began targeting the second ship in the British line, which was Princess Royal. In return, Derfflinger remained untargeted, as both Lion and Princess Royal were targeting the leading German battlecruiser, the Lutzow, which was under the command of Vice Admiral Franz von Hipper. Initially, Derfflinger was overshooting the Princess Royal, but after adjusting its aim, it began landing shells, with a total of 8 hits being accounted for. However, at 17:16, Princess Royal veered out of Derfflinger's maximum firing range, and so Derfflinger shifted its fire to the third ship in the line, which was Queen Mary. Derfflinger would rapidly fire on Queen Mary until 17:26, when Corvette Captain Hasse, who was the artillery officer, recounted. First of all, a vivid red flame shot up from her forepart. Then came an explosion forward, which was followed by a much heavier explosion amidships. Black debris from the ship flew into the air, and immediately afterwards the whole ship blew up with a terrific explosion. The Queen Mary had suffered a devastating magazine explosion, which resulted in the ship foundering. Derfflinger by this point still remained unengaged, and at 17:47 it was noticed that Beatty's line had made a turn in front of the German main body. As a result, at 17:53, the German battlecruisers turned onto a northerly course ahead of the main body, the High Seas Fleet, and resumed battle against the British battlecruiser squadrons. Unfortunately, at 18:10, the British battlecruisers would sail outside of Derfflinger's maximum firing range, and so Derfflinger had to adjust its fire to the 5th Battle Squadron's Queen Elizabeth-class battleships, and it ended up targeting HMS Valiant. It had been decided to switch over to high-explosive shells, and as a result, no hits were registered by Derfflinger on Valiant, and only near misses caused splinter damage. Derfflinger's luck remained strong, but this would begin to change at 1819, when the first shell had struck the vessel on the bow, causing minor damage. It was quickly followed up at 1830 by a further 2 shell hits. At 1855, the pace at which the leading German battlecruisers, including Derfflinger, would take hits would rapidly increase, as the remnants of the 1st and 2nd battlecruiser squadrons increased their fire, and they were now supported by the freshly engaged 3rd battlecruiser squadron from the northeast. At 1911, British cruisers came into sight, and Lutzow quickly opened fire on what would later be identified as HMS Defense. However, Derfflinger was struggling to identify the target and initially held fire, but would soon join in, and at 1920, Defense blew up and sank. After sinking the Defense, the German battlecruisers were struggling to identify targets due to the decreasing visibility, but at 1928, Derfflinger and Lutzow would open fire on the newly spotted Invincible, which was the flagship of the 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron, and at 1931, it would blow up and sink as well. After sinking Invincible at 1935, the German battlecruisers changed course due west in order to escape the remaining fire of the 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron. Shortly afterwards, at 1945, the Lutzow had veered out of line in order to reduce speed so that Vice Admiral Hipper could abandon his flagship and set up command elsewhere. For the meantime, Captain Sir C. Hartog was in command from the Derfflinger. At 1955, it was decided to alter course again, placing the German battlecruisers at the head of the German line, and they were now leading the High Seas Fleet directly into Sir John Jellicoe's Grand Fleet with more than 30 battleships. With Derfflinger now leading the German line at 20:04, it would feel the full force of the Grand Fleet, as it was the first vessel that came into view and was placed under increasing fire. At 2013, Vice Admiral Scheer ordered his battlecruisers to attack the Grand Fleet, but due to poor visibility, they were unable to respond effectively. At 2050, Derfflinger would turn onto a southerly course, and at 21:20, it would sustain the final hit it would have to endure during the battle. At 21:31, Derfflinger would fire its last shot in the battle and continue to sail back towards the safety of German waters. At 21:57, Vice Admiral Hipper was finally able to board the Moltke, which had sustained minor damage during the battle, and was able to resume his duties. Due to the damage that Derfflinger had sustained during the fighting, its speed had to be reduced, and as a result, Vice Admiral Scheer ordered it to the rear of the German line. It would remain in this position until 1540 on the 1st of June 1916, when the vessel finally laid anchor at Wilhelmshaven Roads. Derfflinger would be examined by members at the Imperial Dockyard, and they would note a total of 31 identifiable hits on the vessel, with varying positions and degrees of damage. Due to the amount of ships firing on Derfflinger during the battle, there is no certainty as to which hit corresponds to which ship and at what time certain hits were sustained. Due to those factors, the Imperial Dockyard's diagram identifies the hits in order from 1 at the stern to 31 at the bow, and for the simplicity of this presentation, I will continue with this method. Hit 1 was a 4-inch shell that penetrated the rearmost skylight of the after cabins, causing minor damage. Hit 2 was a 15-inch shell that struck the hull outside of frame 22 on the port side. It exploded and destroyed a handful of officer cabins and the commander's cabin. Hit 3 was a 15-inch shell that struck the hull at frame 27 on the port side. It would penetrate and explode against the starboard hull on the inside, causing a 5-meter hole in the Schweischen deck and destroying several cabins. Hit 4 was a 12-inch shell that struck the port side of the skylight at frame 40, where it exploded, blowing a 3-meter hole in the deck and destroying several officer cabins below. Hit 5 was a large caliber shell that struck the port armor belt at frame 61, where it would shatter but push the armor belt in 40 millimeters and cause minor flooding. It also damaged a few torpedo net holders, which resulted in the torpedo net sagging and threatening to foul in the propellers. Hit 6 was a 15-inch shell that struck the roof of D turret, where it then penetrated the 110 millimeter roof armor and exploded in the right-hand side of the firing chamber. 20 charges equating to approximately 1,000 kilograms of powder would burn in the handling room, but would spread no further. 74 men would die within the turret, leaving only 2 men to escape, and the turret was placed out of action. Hit 7 was a large caliber shell that struck the hull at frame 88 and shattered on the 265 millimeter thick belt. It caused some of the armor plating to shrapnel, piercing ventilation shafting for the after engine rooms, creating a poisonous gas danger in that compartment. Hit 8 was a large caliber shell that struck the main armor belt at frame 94. The shell successfully exploded on the 300 millimeter thick armor belt and only caused them to bow in slightly. No other damage was sustained. Hit 9 was a 4-inch shell that penetrated the ventilation shaft of the port engine room and failed to explode, causing minor damage. Hit 10 was a 15-inch shell that struck the 260 millimeter thick armor of C Barbette, where it then successfully detonated above the turntable between the guns of the turret. It would successfully cause a hole in the barbette, and 14 charges within the turret and its handling room would burn off. The training mechanism was completely destroyed, and of the turret crew, 68 would perish, and only 6 would escape. The turret was placed out of action. Hit number 11 was a large caliber shell that struck the 300 millimeter thick main armor belt and successfully exploded, but only caused minor bowing and cracking of the armor plating, which was all contained by the splinter bulkhead. Hit 12 was a 4-inch shell that passed through the main mast and did not explode. Hit 13 was a 15-inch shell that struck the port side of the after funnel, and it passed through the funnel without exploding, causing minor damage to some of the funnel's piping. Hit 14 was another 15-inch shell that penetrated the after funnel and passed through without exploding, causing similar damage to the previous hit. Hit 15 was a 6-inch shell that also passed through the after funnel without exploding, causing minor damage. Hit 16 was a 6-inch shell that penetrated the superstructure and exploded in the deck officer cabins and mess, destroying them. Hit number 17 was a 12-inch shell that struck the barrel of the number 3 port 15-centimeter gun, where it successfully detonated on the 80mm thick gun shield, but it failed to penetrate the gun shield itself. Fragments would then strike the number 2 15-centimeter gun, damaging its elevation and traversing equipment, placing both the number 2 and 3 15-centimeter guns out of action. Hit 18 was a 15-inch shell that penetrated and passed through the forward funnel without exploding, damaging piping. Hit 20 was a large caliber shell that struck the port side superstructure at frame 195, and it exploded in the infirmary. It blew a 5.6 meter hole in the superstructure side, a 2.5 meter hole in the upper superstructure deck, and a 5 meter hole in the lower superstructure deck. Hit 21 was a 4-inch shell that struck the superstructure and exploded below the chart room. Hit 22 was an unidentified shell that struck the foremast and damaged the yardarm. Hit 21 was a 12-inch shell that had struck the port side of the conning tower. It had failed to penetrate the 300mm thick armor, but did successfully detonate on the exterior of the conning tower, causing gases to enter it, and gas mask had to be worn. Fragments were sent to the rear of B turret, damaging its rangefinder, and a 2-meter hole was blown in the upper superstructure deck. Hit 24 was a large caliber shell that fell short of Derfflinger and exploded in the water along its torpedo defense system, damaging the outer skin and allowing flooding. Hit 25 was a large caliber shell that struck the port side of the 260mm thick A-turret barbette. Where the shell failed to explode on the barbette, it fell to the deck below and rolled over the side of the ship, causing minor damage. Hit 26 was a 12-inch shell that struck the 260mm thick armor of A-turret's barbette on the port side, where it exploded and caused a 3.5-meter hole in the battery deck and a 1.2-meter hole in the Schweissen deck. It also temporarily disabled the A-turret as its training mechanism was blocked. Hit 27 was a 4-inch shell that penetrated the forecastle below the battery deck and failed to explode. Hit 28 was a 4-inch shell that struck the hull at frame 263 and exploded in compartment 15. Hit 29 was a 15-inch shell that struck the port hull at frame 284 and successfully detonated on the lower Schweissen deck. It tore a large hole in the hull and sent splinters, causing minor holes across the bow. It also destroyed the steam pipes to the forward capstan. The Unterofficer's technical room and canteen were destroyed in the detonation of the shell and set afire. Due to the extensive holes over the bow and Derfflinger's high speed during the battle, flooding would occur across the bow over the course of the battle. Hit 30 was a large caliber shell that struck the bow on the number 4 and 5 100mm thick armored plates, where it then successfully exploded and dislodged those two plates, allowing flooding. Hit 31 was later identified when Derfflinger was dry docked as an unknown shell fell short under the water and exploded near the port shaft shroud, causing minor damage. Derfflinger had suffered extensively during the fighting. Most of the bow had flooded, several voids in the port torpedo defense system had flooded, and the C and D magazines had to be flooded to prevent magazine detonations. Fortunately for the Derfflinger, unlike its sister ship Lutzow, where the majority of large-caliber hits were concentrated around the bow of the ship, allowing flooding to overtake that vessel, Derfflinger's hits were spaced out across the entire length of the vessel, which permitted the ship to sustain itself with minor flooding. While Derfflinger was severely damaged during the fighting, and its defensive and offensive capabilities were heavily reduced, the ship at no point was in danger of sinking. It certainly goes to show the remarkable engineering behind Germany's most advanced battlecruisers to sea service. With that having been said, I have nothing more I wish to add on to this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.